a lot. Our opportunities are things that we like to do, which is what you have, a little taste of what you have when you're in prison. And obviously, as we know, there are different kinds of prisons. There's jails, there's maximum security, there's country club prisons. And again, it doesn't seem fair sometimes why people are in prison that they're in. But I will tell you this. One of the things that unites all of them is that your freedoms are restricted. And the other thing I think that you'll see in the story, or we've seen in the last few weeks, and we see this week as well, this roller coaster that Joseph is in, where he has freedom, he's given responsibility, he has it taken away, he goes up and down. And this roller coaster of Joseph's life is very relevant and very it's something that we're living in right now. And that roller coaster has an effect on people. And again, we want everything to continue to get better, and our hope is that it continues to progress where we feel like, but because we've been on this roller coaster now, and because we've gone up and down and up, we're going to have this fear, even as things get better, that until there's a cure for this, that it's going to get taken back again. And that feeling of not knowing when it's going to happen is not, it's not a good way to live. And Joseph, it's hard to know whether Joseph ever was able to feel ever in his life a sense of stability or a sense of comfort, because maybe he thought in the back of his mind the bottom's going to drop out again. So just keep that in mind as we read this story about what somebody who lives like this continues to live with, and what is it going to mean for probably younger people now who've lived through this. I think when you're older, you kind of are who you are, but what happens to a teenager, or what happens to a kid who watches their family, go in and out of quarantine and goes in and out of not knowing whether they're going to school or not? What kind of effect is that going to have on people long term? So we don't know. I mean, we won't know for many years. So let's take a look at, make this a little bit bigger for everybody. Let's take a look at Joseph in prison.
By way of punishment for having traduced his 10 brethren before his father, Joseph had to languish for 10 years in the prison to which the wiles of traducers had in turn condemned him. But on the other hand, as he had sanctified the name of God before the world by his chastity and his steadfastness, he was rewarded. The letter he, which occurs twice in the name of God, was added to his name. He had been called Joseph, but now he was called also Jehoshaphat, or Jehoshaphat.
Yeah, so let's explain that. So there's a midrash about the letter Hey, right? So what is this from? So here's the issue.
Yes, somewhere, yeah. There will be the all cabins.
Okay, hold this. Okay, sorry. So what happens here is we have a midrash about why Joseph's name has a Hey in it. Well, Joseph's name doesn't have a Hey in it normally. It is in the book. I don't know why this keeps. Somebody is not being muted. There in Psalms, in the book of Psalms, in Psalm 81, Joseph is called Jehoshaphat. There's a Hey added to it. So this midrash explains why is there a variant spelling of Joseph. It was a scribal error in Psalms, because it's not in Genesis that we have this name Joseph, but the name Yosef means essentially God will add, but it's not a full name of God. Well, nobody has the full name of God in their name. That would be sacrilegious. But you could have a Yud in your name, but here he now if it's Yehoshaph, he has a yud and a hey. Because remember, the divine name of God has a yud, a hey, a vav, and a hey. It has two heys. And so to have a hey in the name is something that God does. He does it to Abraham. He adds a hey to Abraham's name. He actually changes Abraham and Sarah. Sarai becomes Sarah, and Avram becomes Avraham. And so the change of name is God saying to the Abraham and Sarah, you're special people. I'm changing your name. Remember, Jacob's name gets changed to Israel too. I mean, his name gets totally changed. Isaac is the only patriarch whose name doesn't get changed. That's one of the interesting things about Isaac too, is that his name doesn't change, which I think kind of indicates, at least to the rabbis, that Isaac's name not being changed means kind of like he's consistently like not a good person, but he's at the level that he doesn't go through a transformation. Jacob does when he wrestles the angel, or that's considered kind of the final step, maybe, if you will. Avraham is when he's covenanted. But Joseph, we don't see Joseph's name like specifically get changed, but because it is in this variant spelling in Psalms, the rabbis interpret here that Joseph's name got changed too, which means that he's like Abraham and Jacob and that his name gets changed. By the way, they're not the last people whose name gets changed. The Bible specifically says that Joshua's name gets changed. He has a hey added to his name. It becomes Yehoshua, from Yeshua to Yehoshua. So to add a hey to a name is something that happens even later on. And then, Joseph then going through this change means he's a little bit like the patriarchs, Abraham and Jacob. So this Midrash is teaching us that Joseph is almost like those patriarchs, and I guess Joshua too, in that he goes through a name change, and therefore he's like a transformed person who carries now God's name in his name. I mean, so kind of keep that in mind. So that is the divine hey, if you will. That's the hey that means that you're kind of part of Hashem. You're part of God. At a different level. Anyway, so it's an explanation for a variant spelling in Psalms. So we don't have that variant spelling in Genesis itself. And Joseph's name is used a lot. It's just we don't have that. So here he is. This is also, as you saw, 4 lines about him in prison. This story also not there at all, but it's an interesting story. All right.
Though he was bound in prison, Joseph was not yet safe from the machinations of his mistress, whose passions for him was no wise lessened. In truth, it was she that had induced her husband to change his intention regarding Joseph. She urged him to imprison the slave rather than kill him, for she hoped that as a prisoner he could be made more amenable to her wishes more easily. She spoke to her husband, saying, "Do not destroy your property. Cast the slave in prison and keep him there until you can sell him and receive back the money you did pay out for him." Thus, she had the opportunity of visiting Joseph in his cell and trying to persuade him to do her will. She would say, "This and that outrage have I executed against you, but as you live, I will put yet other outrages upon you if you do not obey me." But Joseph replied, "The Lord executes judgment for the oppressed."
Okay, so pause right there. We're going to have this story continues for a couple paragraphs, but so you see what happens. I mean, I know it's bizarre. It's a bizarre story, which is that she doesn't stop. Zuleika, or the name we have for Potiphar's wife, if you haven't been here for a couple weeks, it's Potiphar's wife. She does not stop. She actually uses the opportunity of him being in prison to make her, to proposition him and to harass him and to try to wear him down even more and take advantage of the situation that he's in now, which is, now I've got him trapped. And I can tell him, look, you think it's bad now? I'm going to make it worse if you don't give in to me. So it's a bizarre midrash. Now, you'd be saying, well, how, like, where would you even get that from? And the rabbis do something really interesting here. And this is where the midrash is so clever, because the rabbis essentially pose this question again, which is, why didn't Potiphar kill Joseph? Why is he keeping a slave alive? Like, what's the reason? I mean, he's property. The guy did, Joseph did something complete. I mean, if what he did was true, which again, we have a midrash that Potiphar doesn't believe it's true. But if you follow this logic that, that Potiphar's been shamed, that Joseph has brought shame on the whole house and he's property, why doesn't he just kill him? And so the rabbis do something really interesting, which is that they say that it was her idea to keep him alive in the first place, because that way she could continue this. So it's kind of an explanation for how is Joseph alive? Why is he still alive? Which is a fair question. It's a totally legitimate question to ask. Isn't the easiest thing, if you're Potiphar, just to kill the guy, to kill Joseph and say, he ain't my problem anymore? So this is a very clever answer to that question. And then building on it, it of course ramps up the tension. So none of this is in the Torah. I'm going to say it again, 4 verses. Nothing in there alluded to this at all. But they also ask, obviously, the rabbis ask a really important question. Was that it for Potiphar's wife? Because we don't hear about her anymore. We don't hear any more from her. And they don't like that either. They don't like the fact that, she's just going to give up now? What is she really, knowing Joseph is still alive, going to leave him alone? So this is all kind of like filling in those 4 verses and trying to give us some good lessons. And of course, that's not where they leave it. They're going to now take it and say, what can we learn from that? What can Joseph teach us for being courageous and not giving up? So here we go.
Zuleika, I will push matters so far that all men will hate you. Joseph, the Lord loveth the righteous. Zuleika, I will sell you into a strange land. Joseph, the Lord preserves the strangers. Then she would resort to enticements in order to obtain her desire. She would promise to release him from prison if he would but grant her wish. But he would say, better it is to remain here than be with you and commit a trespass against God. These visits to Joseph in prison, Zuleika continued for a long time, but when finally she saw that all her hopes were vain, she let him alone.
Yep. So the rabbis, of course, are able to throw in some other parts of the Bible here. So these quotes back and forth between Joseph and Zuleika will say something and then he'll counter with words of Bible. So, the Lord preserves the strangers is from Psalm 146. She just throws stuff out. And every time she says, I'm going to do these things to you, he says, he quotes the Bible. Now, of course, this is a later part of the Bible, but it shows you again, the Bible is timeless, and that, our ancestors, our patriarchs in particular, would quote the Bible. So we see that a lot in the Midrash too, that the rabbis like to quote other parts of the Bible, and they love to put Proverbs and Psalms and words of wisdom into the mouths of people who lived hundreds of years before those things were written down in the Bible. So that essentially, when we wrote Psalms and we wrote Proverbs, we're saying these words are also they're also transcendent. They're immortal words. They're words that that our leaders and our heroes have spoken before. So that's what they also just did. But within that story, it allowed them to quote and to use Bible that people would know. And remember, this was a normal, like, people quoting. Obviously, I think you'll see it more in the Christian world today, but the idea of quoting the Bible or quoting the Talmud was something that Jews did all the time. I mean, that was like, that's what you did. I mean, you would quote, you'd throw out, somebody would say something and you would quote it. And that was like, that's what you did. It showed that you knew the text. It showed that you were a pious person, that you were, an intelligent person. You'd quote that's what they did. I mean, now we're kind of the opposite in the sense that, we'll somebody says something and we'll quote, Animal House, or what, some movie, because it sounds something like what we could throw out some line from, a comedy. But in our world, quoting the Bible was a normal thing to do. If people fed you a line, that's the line you would give back. And that's what makes, by the way, that's what makes the Tevye stories, the Fiddler on the Roof stories, so amazing and so endearing and intelligent and powerful, is that Tevye constantly misquotes the Bible, and he constantly misquotes the Talmud in really funny ways. Where, I mean, sometimes he does it right. I mean, sometimes he quotes it right, but a lot of times he like says it wrong, and it makes it just more endearing that he's trying to be pious. He's trying to say the right words, but he's a simple dairyman who, doesn't quite get it right, but he means well, and just shows you how he's trying to be holy. And that's what we did. I mean, that's what Jewish people did. They would quote these sources, and it kind of was the way you talked. So a different time, and we you can't do it anymore. I mean, people don't know the Bible well enough to even do it, and people just would think you're a crazy person quoting, especially if you did the King James Bible. They say, what's that? That person's nuts. But it was pretty much what we did. All right. So she's not stopping.
As the mistress persisted in her love for Joseph, so his master, her husband, could not separate himself from his favorite slave. Though a prisoner, Joseph continued to minister to the needs of Potiphar, and he received permission from the keeper of the prison to spend some of his time in his master's house. In many other ways, the jailer showed himself kindly disposed toward Joseph. Seeing the youth's zeal and conscientiousness in executing the tasks laid upon him, and under the spell of his enchanting beauty, he made prison life as easy as possible for his charge. He even ordered better dishes for him than the common prison fare, and he found it superfluous caution to keep watch over Joseph, for he could see no wrong in him. And he observed that God was with him, in good days and in bad. He even appointed him to be the overseer of the prison. And as Joseph commanded, so the other prisoners were obliged to do.
Yeah, so here you kind of see that maybe the prison was not quite like what let's put it this way. It's the prison that white collar crime folk go to, where, they get to go home and hang out and then come back at night, or some of these crazy things you hear about. That maybe this was a little bit more like that, because in this case, it seems that Joseph got to do work for Potiphar still. So this Midrash kind of also asks the question, what happens to Potiphar? Does Potiphar just write off Joseph and say, I'm done with that? That guy's, I don't ever want to see him again. At least according to this Midrash, they still had a relationship, and that Joseph still was an important part of Potiphar's house, that he still continues to kind of manage things. He's managing things for the prison, and he's also still managing things for Potiphar. So he doesn't have freedom, but he does have the ability to kind of come and go, and he has the ability to continue like having a job with this guy that has, it's going to continue to put him in a situation where something could happen with the wife. So it's a weird story in a sense, because you're like, how could that happen? And the answer is because it could happen, in the sense, because prisons were like that. And so when they throw this out there, this isn't like beyond the realm of possibility. This could have happened. Not likely, maybe, but it could have happened that Potiphar continued to have Joseph as part of his house, because if Potiphar is reaping so much benefit from Joseph, does he really want to give up having Joseph around? And so this is a midrash to do that kind of explains that. So that's the questions. What happens to Potiphar? What happens to Potiphar's wife? what's Joseph's life like when he's in this prison, and he's there, as we know, for 10 years. And we said last week, the rabbis kind of put out there that he's there for 10 years because he had to make up for what he did to his brothers. So this in a way is punishment. Well, you think, well, isn't getting sold into slavery punishment? No. They thought he had to go, that there was some justification for him being in prison for what he had done to his brothers by informing on them, by tattling on them in the first place. And that's crazy in a way, but it kind of explains this idea that maybe Joseph did do something where he needed to be chastised and he needed to be put on ice, if you will. But it's not necessarily the most obvious answer. Yeah.
The feeling, I remember as a kid, you read about Joseph and, yes, he gets sold into slavery and all that, but, first he's snooty to his brothers and he's the favorite. And then he plays a nasty trick on them afterwards. And a couple of times. And so this to me is making Joseph out to be way better than he was, way more, from the image that I formed of him, reading the Torah itself.
It definitely gives us, the Torah definitely gives us the possibility that Joseph is a problem. I mean, Jacob says so. Jacob says, he understands that his son may be bringing some of this on himself. But the rabbis go a step further in the Midrash, in that
they make him holy. They make him.
Yeah, but they also make it so that that there's a punishment of 10 years in prison for informing on his brothers in the first place, which seems to me to be a little excessive. The weird thing about this is that there's a sense, you could have a sense of this, that Joseph, well, first of all, the rabbis have already told us that Joseph feels like he's carrying out a divine plan, that Joseph is part of this. Joseph is a willing participant in this plan of facilitating what was already prophesied, which is Israel's time in Egypt. So that Joseph is also holy in that way, and that he's willing to go through this. There's another possibility here too, which is alluded to in the Midrash, which is, does Joseph also, in a way, is Joseph happy to be away from his family? And being away from his family means that even as bad as it is to be in Potiphar's house or to be in prison, he's not with them. He's not with those people anymore. And that being away from them is, he's willing to live this life away from them in order to just be away from them. Now, I'm going to tell you part of why this is a possibility, and I think why we're more accepting of this today. Well, it's partly because, okay, he's living 200 miles away from his family. Now, if you're living 200, 300 miles away from your family, we go, what, you get in the car and you're there in 4 or 5 hours. I mean, that's the way we think about it. There were people who lived 200 or 300 miles away from their family who never saw their family again. So it is very possible that, he just didn't think he was ever going to see his family again. He knows he's in Egypt. He knows that that's a totally different world than Canaan. So he just really doesn't think he's going to see them again. But there's still a problem, which is that once he rises to power in Egypt, okay, once he becomes Pharaoh's right-hand man, he can go back home anytime he wants. He can send for them, he can send a message, let them know he's alive. He doesn't do that. And that has to be something the rabbis knew. The idea of him getting in a chariot and riding back home, maybe that wasn't something that was done that often. I mean, it could be just, they said, yeah, just people didn't do that. I mean, I think they did. I mean,
Yeah,
but
but
they
also he
definitely
had a
could have
better life there than he did before.
fine, but he doesn't even send a message back home to tell his father that he's still alive.
Were you looking for your Kentucky Derby t-shirt by any chance? Not Kentucky Derby.
So just understand that this is that no matter what is a reality that the rabbis knew, that Joseph never told his family that he was still alive. That he could have done. He could have done it. And one way or the other, he didn't have to go home, didn't have to necessarily bring them back, but he doesn't even tell them he's alive. So they knew that. I mean, that is not a historical anomaly, or I mean historical context or whatever. That's not, there's nothing about that they didn't get to and that we don't get. We might take it another level, which is, don't you go home as soon as you're in power? Don't you go home and tell your family, hey, I'm back here in Egypt, and guess what, I've been promoted, and you should come down. I'm going to take good care of you. He doesn't do it. So just keep that in mind. I mean, that's in the background, that the rabbis they're gonna answer that question to some extent, but they have to ask that has to be part of the equation. All right. So again, 4 verses. All right.
For a long time, the people talked of nothing but the accusation raised against Joseph by his mistress. In order to divert the attention of the public from him, God ordained that 2 high officers, the chief butler and the chief baker, should offend their lord, the king of Egypt, and they were put in ward in the house of the captain of the guard. Now the people ceased their talk about Joseph and spoke only of the scandal at court. The charges laid at the door of the noble prisoners were that they had attempted to do violence to the daughter of Pharaoh, and they had conspired to poison the king himself. Besides, they had shown themselves derelict in their service. In the wine the chief butler had handed to the king to drink, a fly had been discovered, and the bread set upon the royal board by the chief baker contained a little pebble. On account of all these transgressions, they were condemned to death by Pharaoh. But for the sake of Joseph, it was ordained by divine providence that the king should first detain them in prison before he ordered their execution. The Lord had kindled the wrath of the king against his servants, only that the wish of Joseph for liberty might be fulfilled, for they were the instruments of his deliverance from prison. And though they were doomed to death, yet in consideration of the exalted office they had held at court, the keeper of the prison accorded them privileges, as, for instance, a man was detailed to wait upon them, and the one appointed thereto was Joseph.
So now we get to the next verse, the beginning of that next chapter, which is the story of the baker and the cupbearer. So there's different translations for it. I don't want people to get confused about who these people are, but one of them is the cupbearer or the food taster, and the other is a baker. Now, obviously, both of these people have access to the Pharaoh's food. That's part of the backstory, the historical backstory of this, which is that these are the only 2 people who could probably pull off an assassination attempt by poisoning, would be these 2 guys. The people who make the food, the person who makes the food, and then the person who tastes the food for Pharaoh. So you'd have to have either both of them complicit or at least one of them complicit in this in order to get it there to him. So this is the context of this story, but we don't know how long they're in prison together. We do know that Joseph is 17 years old when he gets sold into slavery. We read that he's 30 years old when he's out of slavery.
Years.
It appears that he's in prison for about 10 years because he's in Potiphar's house for some period of time. And we know for a fact, or we know for what the Bible tells us, that he's in prison for 2 years after the incident of interpreting the dream. That he's there for 2 more years after he tells them after he tells the cupbearer to remember him. He's there for 2 more years. Okay, so keep that in mind. That's That's 12 years that he's in prison. And he's in prison from the time he's 17 or 18 till the time he's 30, which means he's there during arguably the best time of one's life. And I'm not going to say it always is. And I'm not going to say, you're going to say, hey, that wasn't my years of 18 to 30 were not the best years of my life. But let's face it, those are years that you're pretty much in good health. You're an adult. You get to kind of do what you want to do finally. And this guy spent that period of time when he should have been out, running around, getting married, getting settled down, having kids. He spent that time in prison or as a slave. There is something really powerful about that lesson of what happens to his life during during this time, during this prime of his life, that he can never, ever, ever get back. So, I mean, that's what the Bible says about his time. There's a whole lot more we're going to read in the Midrash about, obviously, we already have read about what happens. But that's what happens to Joseph for 12 years of his life. So this isn't a 2-year process. This isn't even 5 years. I mean, this is a good chunk, a decade of life. Over a decade of life is a long time to be living and to be, in some cases, having your day-to-day existence so precarious that you didn't know if today was the day that this was, it's all going to end for you. That's the way he lived these formative and what should have been really, really wonderful years of his life. Keep that in mind. Let's take a quick look at what the Torah says about this time, which is, one second, also kind of limited and not, let's see. It is, right now. So it says sometime later, so we don't know how many years into the captivity, the cupbearer and the baker of the king of Egypt gave offense to their lord, the king of Egypt. So that's what it says that they did. It doesn't say they tried to poison him. It didn't say they met, it doesn't really say. The Midrash gives us one possibility, which is that they just messed up. But there does seem to be, well, wait, who are these guys? Pharaoh was angry with his courtiers, the chief cupbearer and the chief baker. And put them in custody in the house of the chief steward in the same prison where Joseph was confined. The chief steward assigned Joseph to them, and he attended to them when they had been in custody for some time. Both of them, the cupbearer and the baker of the king of Egypt, who were confined in prison, dreamed in the same night, each his own dream, and each dream with its own meaning. So I will say, the fact that it says that they dreamed their own dream seems strange to the rabbis, that there's that language. Why doesn't it just say they each had a dream? So keep that in mind, that there seems to be a repetitive language to this whole thing. When Joseph came to them in the morning, he saw that they were distraught. He asked Pharaoh's courtiers, who were in custody with him in his master's house, saying, "Why do you appear downcast today?" By the way, notice how it says in his master's house. Now, again, the word bait means house, a home, a domicile, a building, but it does seem to mean to be a little bit more like you're in a house than a prison, using those words. And they said to him, "We had dreams, and there is no one to interpret them." So Joseph said to them, "Surely God can interpret. Tell me your dreams." Now, notice what he says. God can interpret the dreams, but tell them to me. Then the chief cupbearer told his dream to Joseph. He said, let's wait for well, you know what? Since we have it, let's read the dream now. "In my dream, there was a vine in front of me. On the vine were 3 branches. It had barely budded when out came its blossom, and its clusters ripened into grapes. Pharaoh's cup was in my hand, and I took the grapes, pressed them into Pharaoh's cup, and placed the cup in Pharaoh's hand. Joseph said to him, this is its interpretation. 3 branches are 3 days. In 3 days, Pharaoh will pardon you and restore your post. You will place Pharaoh's cup in his hand, as was your custom formerly when you were his cupbearer. But think of me when all is well with you again, and do me the kindness of mentioning me to Pharaoh, so as to free me from this place. For in truth, I was kidnapped from the land of Hebrews, nor have I done anything here that I should be put in this dungeon. And the word bur in Hebrew does convey a sense of a dungeon or pit. It's a pit. So again, that's the way Joseph describes being where he is. When the chief baker saw how favorably he had interpreted, he said to Joseph, in my dream, similarly, there were 3 open work baskets on my head. In the uppermost basket were all kinds of food for Pharaoh that a baker prepares. And the birds were eating it out of the basket above my head. Joseph answered, this is its interpretation. The 3 baskets are 3 days. In 3 days, Pharaoh will lift off your head and impale you upon a pole, and the birds will pick off your flesh. Yeah. On the 3rd day, his birthday, Pharaoh made a banquet for all his officials, and he singled out his chief cupbearer and his chief baker from among his officials. He restored the chief cupbearer to his cupbearing. And again, it is that word, mashkim, hamashkim is the cupbearer, and it says al mashkehu, which means butlering or cupbearing. It's the verb and the noun are the same. But the chief baker he impaled, just as Joseph had interpreted to them. Yet the chief cupbearer did not think of Joseph. He forgot him. That's the end of that Torah portion. And the next Torah portion, Miketz, which we usually read in December time, says right around Hanukkah, after 2 years' time, Pharaoh dreamed that he was standing by the Nile. So 2 years pass. That's for sure. It says 2 years passed from that time to when Joseph will finally interpret Pharaoh's dream and get out of prison. Okay? So just keep in mind, that is the most detailed part of Joseph in prison. So we know 4 verses about what it was like before these guys got there. And then we read about the dream situation. So most of chapter 40 is the recitation of the dreams. So basically, it's from chapter 8 or chapter 9, or excuse me, verse 9 to the end to verse 23. Those 15 verses of the 23 verses are really the dreams, the recitation of the dreams. So we really only have maybe 12 verses of what Joseph's life was like from a narrative point of view in the prison for those years. So that's it. That's what we have. So now let's look at what the Midrash does with the dreams. Okay. So one thing we have is that the dreams themselves were a way for people to stop talking about Joseph and Potiphar's wife. This gave people a chance to stop talking about this thing. And here, let's read what happens.
The chief butler and the chief baker had been confined in prison 10 years when they dreamed a dream, both of them. But as for the interpretation, each dreamed only that of the other one's dream. Wait, what?
Yep.
In the morning, what is that?
Yep. So let's explain that. So the Torah had this weird word that each of them dreamed. Each of them had a dream. That they were dreaming this dream for a long time, and that was the only dream that they had. And more importantly, that this went on for a really long time. This wasn't like they got thrown in prison, let's figure out who did what and then get them out. that doesn't tell us how long they were in prison for with him. And the simple explanation is that this is just happened in a day, and this is this is the story happened quickly. It unfolds quick. The rabbis are not so sure that this happened quick because we don't have anything else about what happened to Joseph. So they've kind of interpreted that this dream thing went on for a really long time. And they took the strange language, the repetitive language of the Torah, to kind of mean that this went on for a really long time. This dream that needed to be interpreted, but maybe they didn't come into contact with Joseph until just before he interprets the dream. So what's going on here is the rabbi's trying to bring some tension or try to add something to this story that will kind of make the story maybe even more dramatic than it was in the first place. Let's look at it. You'll see what happens with the dreams.
In the morning, when Joseph brought them the water for washing, he found them sad, depressed in spirits, and in the manner of the sages, he asked them why they looked different on that day from other days. They said to him, "We have dreamed a dream this night, and our two dreams resemble each other in certain particulars, and there is none that can interpret them." And Joseph said unto them, "God grants understanding to man to interpret dreams. Tell them me, I pray you." It was as a reward for ascribing greatness and credit to him to whom it belongs that Joseph later attained his lofty position.
Yeah, so the rabbis point out here that by Joseph giving credit to God for the interpretation, that
he gets rewarded.
And the rabbis are pointing out something really important here, which is that when Joseph first is dealing with dreams, it's his own dreams. And not only is he telling his brother his dreams, he's basically telling his brothers that he's going to lord over them because of these dreams. These dreams are prophecies, that he has the ability to see the future, and that in the future, I'm going to lord over you. So he's like completely abusing this gift that he has. He's also not giving credit to God for the gift that he has. The things that Joseph dreamt happened. His brothers did, in fact, bow down to him. Those things did happen. But just because they're going to happen and just because they're prophecies doesn't mean that he said it and did it in the right way. The simple interpret, and again, he's a kid when he tells his brothers his dreams. I mean, let's keep that in mind. He's a teenager when he tells his brothers the dreams. But you could make the argument that Joseph had no business telling his brothers and his parents at the time, "You're all going to bow down to me one day in the future." The proper behavior would have been to keep that to yourself, even if you knew that. So Joseph has the same gift that he has had his whole life, but he's now using it in the proper way. He's now doing the right thing with it, which is trying to help other people and giving credit to God and saying, let me see what I can do through God. I'll help, but it's God who's going to give it. So he's now humble. He's now given credit to God, and he is he's thinking of others. Interestingly, though, he doesn't stop thinking about himself. He says, "Look, when you get out, help me." So that makes sense. I mean, there's nothing wrong necessarily with telling somebody, "Hey, I'm here for a crime I didn't commit. Please help me get out." But remember, he is in a much different situation now. He's been chastised. He's been humbled, and he's now close as he sees really to the corridors of power. Not that maybe Potiphar was also in those corridors of power too, but now he has a chance to, he's now doing a favor for somebody who can really help him. So let's keep that in mind as again, Joseph, and we're going to see the Midrashic version of the interpretation. We read the Torah's literal reading. Now let's read about what the Midrash says happened in these dreams.
The chief butler proceeded to tell his dream. In my dream, behold, a vine was before me, and in the vine were 3 branches. And it was as though it budded, and its blossoms shot forth, and the clusters thereof brought forth ripe grapes. And Pharaoh's cup was in my hand, and I took the grapes, and I pressed them into Pharaoh's cup, and I gave the cup into Pharaoh's hand. The chief butler was not aware that his dream contained a prophecy regarding the future of Israel, but Joseph, discerning the recondite meaning, and he interpreted the dream thus. The 3 branches are the 3 fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, whose descendants in Egypt will be redeemed by 3 leaders, Moses, Aaron, and Miriam. And the cup given into the hand of Pharaoh is the cup of wrath that he will have to drain in the end. This interpretation of the dream Joseph kept for himself, and he told the chief butler nothing thereof, but out of gratitude for the glad tidings of the deliverance of Israel from the bondage of Egypt, he gave him a favorable interpretation of his dream, and begged him to have him in his remembrance when it should be well with him and liberate him from the dungeon in which he was confined.
So we see a few things in this midrash. First is that it has a wider interpretation. It's not just about the chief butler, but it's actually about what's going to happen to Israel in the future, with the in the future generations, when Moses and his family, by the way, Miriam is listed here as one of the leaders that that they're going to redeem. Okay, so this is a prophecy of redemption. So it's even better. And notice what he does. He keeps it to himself. He doesn't say anything. Well, first of all, how would the Egyptians even make sense of this? I mean, this whole concept wouldn't make sense to the Egyptians, but it might, by the way, make them not want to have Joseph's family come down if they know that it's going to wind up being bad for them, because what it says is that in the end, the Pharaoh has to drink a cup of bitterness. Well, what Pharaoh would say, you know what, let's bring these people in who are eventually going to cause us, we get to keep them slaves for a long time, but in the end, they're going to bring problems to us, the 10 plagues, everything else. Who wants that? So maybe it wouldn't have been good for him to tell that dream, part of the dream. So he's learning that you can sometimes get ahead by not telling people everything. It's not a lie necessarily. It's just using your discernment to not give people necessarily news that's going to upset them. Again, it's what would they've even made of that dream? So that's one really important lesson. It shows that Joseph has changed, and that Joseph is Joseph's dream interpretation is not just for the near term, but for a very, very far term. Remember, because that's going to be in the next dream as well. There's another point in here too, which is no. Well, let's look at the and again he says, remember me, but now let's look at the other dream, which is the dream of the butler, is also going to be interpreted differently.
When the chief baker heard the interpretation of the butler's dream, he knew that Joseph had divined its meaning correctly, for in his own he had seen the interpretation of his friend's dream. And he proceeded to tell Joseph what he had dreamed in the night. I also was in my dream, and behold, 3 baskets of white bread were on my head. And in the uppermost basket there was of all manner of baked meats for Pharaoh, and the birds did eat them out of the basket upon my head. Also, this dream conveyed a prophecy regarding the future of Israel. The 3 baskets are the 3 kingdoms to which Israel will be made subject: Babylon, Media, and Greece. And the uppermost basket indicates the wicked rule of Rome, which will extend over all the nations of the world until the bird shall come who is the Messiah, and annihilate Rome. Again, Joseph kept the prophecy a secret. To the chief baker, he gave only an interpretation that had reference to his person, but it was unfavorable to him, because through his dream, Joseph had been made acquainted with the suffering Israel would have to undergo.
Yep. So just as there's a message of redemption in the butler's dream, there's a message of disaster and eventual redemption for the butler's dream. So again, what does this show us? It shows us that when this was written during the Roman era, Jews really did believe that the Romans would be upended and that the Messiah would rule after that. And so that these kingdoms, the Babylonians, the Persians, and the Greeks, were bad, but then the uppermost basket is the Romans, who are the worst, who are the ones that were crucifying and murdering by the millions Jews in ancient Israel and Judea. So when we talk about why did people expect the Messiah to come soon? Because there were messages like this floating around. And so when people expected Jesus as the Messiah, if that in fact, again, if Jesus was one of those expected Messiahs, the fact that he didn't destroy Rome would have upset a lot of Jews. It would have disappointed them. So when people say, well, how did the Jews not recognize Jesus as the Messiah? Well, first of all, again, the Messiah, none of this is in the Bible. This is all later rabbinic interpretation. It's all apocryphal interpretation. It's all stuff that had developed in Judaism over the last maybe 200 years in their history by that point. So maybe from about the 2nd or 3rd century all the way now to the 1st century of Rome, of history, to like the 100s, right? Or to the Roman, to the Roman destruction of the temple. Jewish people wanted the Romans out, and they expected the Messiah to do it. And the fact that Jesus didn't do it meant that he wasn't the Messiah. There wasn't a question of, well, is he going to do other stuff? Is he going to do miracles? Is he going to cure the sick? That wasn't the issue. The only thing the Messiah really had to do for most Jews was to get rid of the Romans, get them out, to destroy them, to flat out lead, by the way, an army against them. So later on, when Bar Kokhba led a revolt against the Romans 60 years after the temple was destroyed, Bar Kokhba was called the Messiah. The Messiah by Rabbi Akiva and other rabbis said he was the Messiah. They said God had made him the one who is going to liberate us from the Romans. Didn't work out either. For 3.5 years, they fought the Romans, but eventually the Romans destroyed Bar Kokhba's armies, massacred him and his armies, and that was the end of the Bar Kokhba revolt. And that was the end of Jews fighting. And by the way, Christians didn't fight in that war with us. They were already by that point separated enough that they didn't die. They didn't fight in that battle. Did they fight in the battle against the Romans in 70? Yes. Was there one Messiah who was the definitive leader of the Jewish people in that battle? No. There was not one Messiah that led the Jews against the Romans, which might explain a little bit why there were so many different battles and so many different places where the Romans had to put out fires during that revolt, because there was no organized revolt. It was a guerrilla war all over the place. But I will tell you this, what you just read was an explanation for why Jews didn't accept Jesus as the Messiah, because he didn't lead a fight. And they wanted a fight. They wanted the Romans to be kicked out forcibly out of Israel. So this was the challenge that Jesus had, or his early followers had, when they went around to Jews and say, Jesus was the Messiah. And they said, well, where's his army? What battles has he won? And then when Jesus was killed, or again, if this amalgamation of who Jesus was the story people said, they'd say he's dead. Well, he can't be the Messiah then, for sure, because the Messiah doesn't die and come back. I mean, even if he does come back, he comes back with an army. He's not really dead. So it was a very, very hard sell for Jews, because basically everything that the Messiah is supposed to do, Jesus didn't do or couldn't do. So that's why it was such a hard proposition for Jews to accept it. Did some did? Yeah. Some saw a spiritual answer that maybe Jesus is not going to lead a physical army. But for most Jews, this is what they wanted. They wanted somebody to avenge them and to really to kick Rome. So keep that in mind. That Midrash gave us a little bit of a hint of when it was written and for who it was written. And it was written for Jews who very much wanted to fight the Romans. So keep that in mind as we're going through this. And again, Reverend Lynn is not on the line right now, but I would be interested to hear what she has to say about that section. But here we go. Oh yeah, she is. She's on mute. Reverend Lynn, are you there? All right.
Yes, you're right.
So I will tell you that that's a little bit of a clue as to what the mentality of the people was, who wrote that.
Right. Jesus was very much a disappointment. I mean, he obviously didn't fit the role as it was interpreted.
And people, and that's part of like one of the like subtexts that we have in, some of the stories about Jesus's the Midrash, if you will, about Jesus, which is that some of his followers, including maybe even somebody like Judas, was like, Jesus, you're not, if you're the Messiah, you better fight, you better lead us in battle. And this idea that maybe Judas was, and based on his name, Iscariot, that maybe he was a Sicarii, that maybe he was part of the actual zealots who were the hardcore fighters, the ones who really killed other Jews if they didn't fight. And that maybe that explains why Judas was so quick, or not so quick, but so violently turning on Jesus, was because the Sicarii killed other Jews that they deemed to be turncoats or collaborators, which again is one of the saddest situations for oppressed people, is that they turn on each other and that they end up killing each other. So, I mean, if anything, Judas might be the most tragic figure in Jewish history of the time, which is maybe a guy who's trying to follow the right path, but is disappointed. And
That's right.
Again, it's brought to life a little bit more in Last Temptation of
Such
Christ.
an all too human response.
Yeah.
Right.
And it's unfortunate.
Well, and then Jesus coming into Jerusalem on a donkey, that was really practically the last straw.
Yeah. And people really wanted him, if he's going to do this, he's going to
do it. Where's
now,
the army?
One could make the argument that the Romans there was no way, I mean, unless again, a miracle was going to happen for the Romans to be defeated. Now you could make the argument, and it can be made, that Jesus did in fact, by his teachings and by his life, he did destroy the Romans the only way they could be destroyed, which was from the inside and changing the culture of Rome, because these same people who were the ones who destroyed Israel wind up being the headquarters for many, many centuries of Jesus's church. So there is
I think that's true, but does that make him the Messiah?
Well, it's an interesting question, because people, I have a more liberal interpretation of what Jesus's role was, and I've said this before. Maybe the only way for the world to be exposed to the Bible and to Jewish, and to the teachings of the Torah was through Jesus. And so there's an interesting midrash that I have on it. Again, that's maybe a modern day, American Jew who has profound respect for Christian teachings and Christian culture, is that, and again, not oblivious to the history as well, but maybe that is what was the role that Jesus and Christianity played in the world, which was to bring the Torah to many other people. I would say that's my interpretation of it. That's the way that I've kind of.
I would say that's liberal Christianity's interpretation as well.
Well, we have again, I guess that's what happens when you're raised under the same kind of inspiration. And that's the hope, is that people do take away those lessons, and they understand what the purpose of this was. And when you think about it in those terms, it truly is a miraculous unfolding of the way things played out. So
And
that
something
is,
certainly unexpected.
yeah. And again, it's the story that we have throughout the Bible, which is strange things happen, and the irony and the almost comical irony of the way things happen. I mean, it's tragic, but it's also, my gosh, look what happened. I mean, look what can happen. The story may not play out the way you want it to play out, but look at what it does and so you think about what the world would look like if this hadn't unfolded as it did. So this is, again,
And that
I
can be
guess,
seen positively or negatively, certainly.
yeah, and that is really the story of Joseph. Where do you stop the story? Do you stop the story when he's in prison? Do you stop the story when he's been raised to the side of the Pharaoh? Where do you stop the story when he gets reunited with his brothers, or do you stop the story when the brothers' descendants are all slaves? Where
I
do
have
you?
a question.
Yeah,
When at some point in the midst of these interpretations, Joseph says, "Remember me," and I guess speak well of me, and mentioned to Pharaoh that I was stolen and from the land of the Hebrews. Why now? Is he tired of being in prison, or does he finally feel he's getting closer to Pharaoh?
yeah, that's an interesting question. So the rabbis seem to posit that he knew that this was the right time, that this was the right opportunity. So this kind of goes along with this tradition, this midrashic tradition, that Joseph knew that he was playing his part in this story, that he had a role to play, and that this was now the time. But it does seem like, in at least the way the Bible puts it out, that he wasn't 100% sure that, like, how am I going to get out of here? So he definitely
Right.
sees an opportunity here. The other part of this story that's weird, and it's in the Torah, is that his opportunity is here. Here's his opportunity. But the Torah is very specific that 2 more years pass. 2 years is a
Right.
long time. It's not a couple months. It's not, I mean,
Especially
2
if you're in
years
prison.
is a long time. Listen, 2 years is longer than Michael Cohen went to prison, and Roger Stone didn't go to prison at all. People, when you go to prison for 2 years, just 2 years, that's enough. Right. I know people who've been sent to prison for 2 years. You don't forget that. He was in prison for 10 years and then 2 more years after he's told them. Now, you can make the argument of, well, the butler just doesn't have an opportunity. The Torah tells us that when Pharaoh has the dream is the way that he has the opportunity. It's weird because it doesn't explain why. The Torah doesn't explain why 2 years pass. The Midrash does. And the Midrash is going to give us a really weird answer, which kind of goes along with maybe what you'd expect in the Midrash, which is it's part of God's plan. But there is a weird thing here, which is that this poor guy is in prison from the years 28 or 29 to 30. Those are still pretty good prime years where this guy, I mean, I had a kid at that time. I was doing things that I loved, and this guy's in prison. So keep that in. I mean, that's a great question. I mean, and that's what the Midrash is going to do right now, which is tell us why 2 years passed, because it seems like Joseph has done this butler an amazing favor. And the Midrash is going to definitely answer that question. So let's read what happens.
Pharaoh's dreams. Properly speaking, Joseph should have gone out free from his dungeon on the same day as the butler. He had been there 10 years by that time and had made amends for the slander he had uttered against his 10 brethren. However, he remained in prison 2 years longer. Blessed is the man that trusts in the Lord and whose hope is the Lord. But Joseph had put his confidence in flesh and blood. He had prayed the chief butler to have him in remembrance when it should be well with him, and make mention of him to Pharaoh. And the butler forgot his promise, and therefore Joseph had to stay in prison 2 years more than the years originally allotted to him there.
So the rabbis just did something really weird there, which is they basically said Joseph stayed 2 years longer in prison because he screwed up again. He didn't. He put his hope in the butler and not in God. I don't know. I mean, it's literally like, they just hit him again for. I mean, he's in 10 years in prison for slandering his brothers, or not, not even slandering them, but tale bearing against them, whatever. But now he's 2 years because he said the wrong thing or believed the wrong thing, that he should have believed God. That's one possibility, but it opens up this answer, which is this even more, even a less obvious answer, but even more creative answer. Here it is.
Butler had not forgotten him intentionally, but it was ordained of God that his memory should fail him. When he would say to himself, if thus and so happens, I will remember the case of Joseph, the conditions he had imagined were sure to be reversed, or if he had made a knot as a reminder, an angel came and undid the knot, and Joseph did not enter his mind.
So God, because we now have this answer that God didn't want him out yet, that the guy tried. He tried to remember, and he couldn't remember. God wouldn't let him remember. So he tried to do the right thing, and he couldn't even do the right thing. So you'd say, hey, if Pharaoh says so and so, I'm going to throw in Joseph's name. Well, it never happened. God wouldn't let it happen. God wouldn't let him do it. And then when he tried to remember it, God wouldn't let him remember it. So it was basically God set it up so that he had to be in prison for 2 more years. So it definitely, like, on the face of it, I always read the story is this: the butler's like any other human being. He got out of prison. Dang, I'm glad I'm out of prison. I ain't going to think of, don't ask me about that. Don't talk to me about it. I'm not going to talk about it. I don't want to revisit it. He's having nightmares still about it, so can't forget it, but I don't want to talk about it. And I'm not going to talk about the people I met in prison. That's the normal answer to that, which is that I forgot. I don't care. I don't want to know. They, in this Midrash, basically say, no, he would have done the right thing, but God didn't let him do the right thing. God wanted Joseph in prison for 2 more years. That's a strange and not necessarily on the face of it explanation. That maybe, again, Reverend Lynn, you asked the question, why doesn't he do it? Why is this, how could this even set up that Joseph doesn't get out after this happens? But that setup is in the Bible, and the Bible basically makes you confront that answer. And again, the most obvious answer isn't where the Midrash takes us. Again, this is one Midrash, but it is weird because it goes totally against what you think really would have happened, which is the guy just didn't do the right thing. He just didn't want to bring it up. Look, if I bring it up to Pharaoh, then Pharaoh remembers why he threw me in prison in the first place. And then he's like, yeah, you know what? Let's put him back in prison. I don't want to talk about prison. So it makes sense that he didn't talk about it. But nope, they went in a completely less obvious answer, which is, oh, he tried. He just couldn't do it. So Joseph is in prison until Pharaoh has his dream. And that is definitely in the Bible. Joseph's liberation is tied to the dreams. It's tied to his interpreting the dreams so that he's even on the radar, and then that Pharaoh has to have his dreams in order for him to get out. So Pharaoh had to have his dreams. So all this has to happen at the right time. All of it has to happen in the right sequence and with the right amount of time passing for this to happen. So here's what it says.
But the Lord sets an end to darkness, and Joseph's liberation was not delayed by a single moment beyond the time decreed for it. God said, "You, O butler, you did forget Joseph, but I did not." And he caused Pharaoh to dream a dream that was the occasion for Joseph's release. In his dream, Pharaoh saw...
So there you have a different Midrash, which is God had a plan, and that plan had to follow, and had to follow its course. And again, they just threw out a line from Job: God sets an end to darkness. This was God's plan. Now it's going to happen, and it happened in the time that God needed it to happen. So
it seems to me that whenever there are problems in the Bible, in Scripture, the rabbis are able to attribute it to God's plan. I mean, that's how you get out of those problems.
Yep.
God wanted it like that.
Yeah, and it probably reflects, by the way, the period when this was written, which was a period of powerlessness, and the fact that they're living under, for much of what we're reading, they're reading under the Roman occupation, and they're literally reading the story the way they have to read the story, which is that this will end. When will we get out of when we get out of this situation? When God says we're going to be out of this situation, which is,
yeah.
I keep forgetting the time frame of this midrash, so that helps.
Yeah, and they just tip their hand again. Well, again, you could make the argument that was most of the last 2,000 years that God will end the bondage when it will, and that was the rabbinic answer to it. Once they decided we're not supporting any more messiahs, which again, not all the rabbis supported Akiba. The ones who didn't support with Bar Kokhba, the ones who weren't with Akiba, and Akiba was like the most popular rabbi. So I mean, Bar Kokhba had the guy you needed. But for all the other rabbis who maybe were seen as timid or afraid, or collaborators even to some extent, those rabbis were the ones who survived, and their brand of Judaism, which was don't make noise, God will end this when God wants it ended. That's the Joseph story. I mean, the Joseph story for them was, you know what? God must have had a plan for Joseph. And when the plan is right, and that mentality still exists in the Orthodox world today. It didn't go away with the establishment of Israel. For some people, it did. For some Orthodox Jews, that was the right time, the right circumstances. God made it happen. For other people who refuse to kind of see Israel as a fulfillment of God's promise, they're still waiting, and they're still saying God will make it happen when it happens, and don't rush it. And so that's why they're still.
Was that, or is that sort of the midrash around the Holocaust?
Yep. And that allows for an interpretation of any disaster, which is that God is allowing this to happen because this is part of God's plan.
Right.
And again, that's what happens to people who've been conditioned to expect it and are going to say, look, this is God's plan. It's tough. I mean,
everything is God's plan.
I have a hard time with that theology because again, it's very upsetting to me that God's plan is the murder of 1.5 million children. But I
absolutely, and there is no free will. Then there is no free will.
Right.
Everything is God's plan.
It's tough for me to deal with, for me to hear that. And again, I understand where it comes from. I try to be respectful of it. I mean, I used to get angry. I mean, I used to really get angry when I heard it, but I don't want to surround myself with it. I definitely don't want to subscribe to it.
Very disturbing.
Yeah. And I don't want to fall into that. I mean, it's easy when bad things happen to say, oh, this is God's plan. And just say, yeah, this person died because it's God's plan. I can't, I'm not going to do that. It is sometimes an easy way out, but if you think about by extension, what that means, as you said, Reverend Lynn, it means there is no free will. And it is a disturbing way. If you follow it to its extension, I don't want to live that way. I'm not going to live that way. So I can't, I guess people can pick and choose all they want, but if you're going to be intellectually honest, it doesn't make sense. I mean, again, you don't have to make sense, but I'm not going to go down.
Well, when our kids were little, there was the Chicago plane crash, and that's when you could still watch the takeoff from the inside of the plane. You could see it taking off. So those people saw themselves crashing as well. And people who lived in our neighborhood, wonderful people. He was the coach for the kids' little baseball thing, and our boys played baseball with him. anyway, when they finally were able to identify some parts or something, the family was not religious, but they chose some little church around the corner and they had a service there for Jim. And the minister said that he was such a fine man that God wanted him. And I was so pissed.
Yeah.
He wanted him and he took 300 other people along.
Yeah.
It seemed absolutely absurd and it made me angry. I did control myself, but it was all I could do not to walk out.
Yeah.
I just, that everything can't be that.
No.
I just have to reject that. God, yeah, it's not my God.
Yeah, it's a theology which allows for people to essentially not deal with really with their lives.
And
They
take
don't-
no responsibility.
with evil.
and it leaves us with literally nothing that we have to do because it's part of God's plan. If somebody
Right.
goes and does something horrible, you just God must have wanted it to happen. Not I could have done something to stop it. So it's a
Exactly.
very dangerous. And again, a lot of people, in all fairness, there's a lot of people who don't think about the consequences of it. They don't take it to the conclusion. There are some people who do, but there are a lot of people who don't really think about what the consequences of that are, that consequences of that really are, which is,
It seems to me it's very pessimistic. It's a very pessimistic view of the world and of life and of people.
but even if you throw at the end this belief that God is going to redeem everything and make everything right, what do we have to do here? I mean, it's literally saying that my actions don't even matter. I mean, as long as I think good
Right.
thoughts and go along with everything, that I'm doing my part. And it's really, really sad because why do I have to get up in the morning then if it doesn't matter? And that's
Right.
really, really a tough thing to think about if you're honest. I mean, if you're honest about what the full conclusion of it is. So I'm not gonna I used to get really upset when Jews would tell me that the Holocaust was part of God's plan. I used to really, I mean, probably the last time I got in a physical altercation was in college with somebody who told me that, and he was Jewish, and I said, how can you say that? I mean, I literally, I got so upset. We were at a party and we were, drinking and everything else, but I was like, this was a person who I had been friends with, and I was like, I can't. It was, I mean, we didn't fight, but I mean, it was literally like, in each other's face and screaming. And I was so upset that I was listening to somebody, and I had watched this kid kind of go down he started getting involved in Orthodox Judaism while we were there together at Oxford. And I'm like, here you're in a place where you're encouraged to think or around some of the greatest minds, and and you're literally going backwards. You've become a, and again, it's Jewish theology. It's not like he was, but it's such an offensive Jewish theology. And it's not like, he didn't know what he was saying when we got involved. It was we were talking about the Holocaust. So how can you tell me the Holocaust was God's plan? God wanted that to happen. He said to me, it's so that Israel could exist. I said, I don't accept that. I don't accept that exchange.
It's not good enough.
This was a pro-Israel person. This wasn't a person who, I mean, he loved Israel. And I was like, how could you say
we children are worth dying to get the state of Israel.
Exactly.
And this was a person who was literally mouthing
Right.
the stuff that he had been picking up from the Orthodox group that he was going to, that he had started going to. I'd seen it happen.
Was he an American guy or
He was an American guy. He was an American guy from Florida who went to University of Miami. We became friends at Oxford, and we were good friends. We'd gone to Israel together during one of our breaks, and he was at heart, he was a good person, and there was a lot of good things about him. But when I saw him go down that road, and he's still, I mean, I don't know how observant he is today, but I think he still goes to an Orthodox synagogue. And we never talked. I mean, that was pretty much we lived in the same house, but I think he moved out not long after that, but we were never friends after that. I couldn't stand it. I watched this person literally in front of me go down this hole. Yeah, it's tough.
Dangerous thinking.
It's a tough logic to have, and it's, again, I understand it. I know why people do it. I get it, but listen, let's ugh.
But as you said, to extend that to its logical conclusion is ridiculous, absurd, and dangerous.
and I and
It's dangerous
I,
thinking.
I think it's especially, again, right now, it's easy thinking to go down. So let's
Right.
yeah, let's read what happens to him when he, I guess we'll get to Pharaoh's dream, just up to Pharaoh's dream.
Down a little bit.
Yep.
Other way.
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
In his dream, Pharaoh saw 7 kine, well-favored and fat-fleshed, come up out of the Nile, and they all together grazed peaceably on the brink of the river. In years when the harvest is abundant, friendship reigns among men, and love and brotherly harmony, and these 7 fat kine stood for 7 such prosperous years. After the fat kine, 7 more came up out of the river, ill-favored and lean-fleshed, and each had her back turned to the other. For when distress prevails, one man turns away from the other. For a brief space, Pharaoh woke, and when he went to sleep again, he dreamed a second dream about 7 rank and good ears of corn, and 7 ears that were thin and blasted with the east wind, the withered ears swallowing the full ears. He woke at once, and it was morning, and dreams dreamed in the morning are the ones that come true.
Wow. Let's talk about that for a second. There's an interesting little teaching here about your dreams. First of all, the dreams are interpreted to mean, obviously, good and bad years for the Egyptians. But again, the rabbis interpret this to also be, if you dream about these things, they also have, meaning you and I dream about these things, that they have symbols too. And so the rabbis did believe in dream interpretation. They believed that there was messages that were contained in dreams. And they believed that when you had the dream, would oftentimes kind of be more indicative of a prophetic dream versus a dream that's maybe more symbolic or more part of our subconscious. That's a sorting. If we know more about how we dream now, but more about sorting the information and trying to put our dreams into sorting out the information that we've had during the day, right? Processing. It's our processing time. But they seem to be saying here that dreams that we have right before we wake up are more of the dreams that are the ones that that are I guess you'd call them premonitions or visions of what happens, that what's going to happen. Look, I don't know the answer, and I don't have the secret, but there are definitely times that we dream things that come to pass pretty close to the way we've dreamt them. I mean, it's happened to me. It's probably happened to most of you. It happened to people thousands of years ago, and it happens. We don't know how it happens. Sometimes people actually write down the dreams and they know it. Sometimes we have that feeling of deja vu that we've seen it, and so I don't know. I don't know the answer. I don't know how it happens, and I don't know where it fits into this idea of predestination or things that can happen, because it would imply that if you could dream something that's about to happen. But again, maybe there are millions of things that can happen, and sometimes we dream what actually does happen. I don't know. I don't have an answer for this, but I do know that the rabbis did feel that the dreams you have closer to when you wake up would be the ones that were more like that. Is that true? Nobody's ever done a scientific study on it, I don't think, but it could be that those dreams do have, well, first of all, those are the dreams that we remember more, but that those are more likely to be the dreams that are not just making sense of what's already happened, but kind of now we're in another sequence of dreams where we're thinking about the future or whatever, It's just an interesting little thing that they threw out there, that the morning dreams that we have would oftentimes be the dreams that would be the ones that we would see something that would actually occur, a premonition dream. So, but the Bible is very clear that he has the dreams twice, and the rabbis point out, which the Torah points out, that this was powerful. That even though the images in the dreams were different, the messages of the dreams was the same, and that sometimes when we have images, they mean certain things, independent. But sometimes they're saying that if you have a dream, the images are talking about the same thing. So it means that different images can sometimes represent in reality the same thing. They're not always representing the same thing. Or again, if two things can both represent the same thing, then like the cows and the grain, that images might mean different things. And they understood that. And there's a lot of writing about interpretation in Judaism on dream interpretation. So there is, I mean, I don't want to say there's books and books. It's not compared to Jewish laws and interpretation of Jewish rituals and customs, but there are books that talk about Jewish dream interpretation or interpretation from a Jewish standpoint. So they being the rabbis continue to put they put stock in what people dream. Not that they actually have to be exactly the thing that they dream, but that there are symbols in dreams, and the symbols teach us something. There's a theory that Freud's the importance that Freud had on dream interpretation came about because of his Jewish identity. His Jewish identity definitely played a role in who he was, a huge role in who he was. Not just because he lived in a very strange, like bipolar anti-Semitic society in Vienna, which sometimes loved Jews and oftentimes really hated Jews during the time that he lived, obviously. I mean, he lived right through right to World War II, where he had to escape Vienna and come to London. But this idea of dream interpretation, he was definitely influenced by the Bible. I think he saw himself to some extent as a modern day Joseph in certain ways. And again, he had, a mixed feeling about Judaism. I mean, he was definitely a very, he was not a observant Jew in the sense that he wasn't going to synagogue regularly or those kind of things, but he definitely knew the community he was a part of, and his Gentile friends and Gentile enemies did not let him forget who he was. So dream interpretation might have helped bring about one of the most radical advancements in understanding who we are, which is psychiatry and psychology. The sciences brought about by Freud's work, and many people consider him one of the most important individuals of the 20th century and of many generations of medicine. This idea of thinking about how our minds operate and how they shape who we are. So there is a interesting connection between dream interpretation, the Torah, this part of the Torah, and understanding who we are today. It doesn't mean that it wouldn't have happened without Freud. I don't want to say, again, maybe it would have happened in a better way. There's a lot of people who've debunked and reevaluated Freud's theories, some of his theories, but there's no question that he opened up our understanding of the mind in a way that nobody had done really before. So, what kind of effect did Joseph have on who we are and how we understand ourselves today in the modern world? Maybe a lot, maybe more than almost anybody else in the Bible. Joseph helped shape our understanding of our mind, of who we are. So let's finish up today with Pharaoh's dreams. We're not going to read what Joseph does once he's in Pharaoh's court, but we are going to read how he got into Pharaoh's court. Yep.
This was not the first time Pharaoh had had these dreams. They had visited him every night during a period of 2 years, and he had forgotten them invariably in the morning. This was the first time he remembered them, for the day had arrived for Joseph to come forth from his prison house. Pharaoh's heart beat violently when he called his dreams to mind on waking. Especially the second one about the ears of corn disquieted him. He reflected that whatever has a mouth can eat, and therefore the dream of the 7 lean kine that ate up the 7 fat kine did not appear strange to him, but the ears of corn that swallowed up other ears of corn troubled his spirit. He therefore called for all the wise men of his land, and they endeavored in vain to find a satisfactory interpretation. They explained that the 7 fat kine meant 7 daughters to be born to Pharaoh, and the 7 lean kine that he would bury 7 daughters. The rank ears of corn meant that Pharaoh would conquer 7 countries, and the blasted ears that 7 provinces would rebel against him. About the ears of corn, they did not all agree. Some thought the good ears stood for 7 cities to be built by Pharaoh, and the 7 withered ears indicated that these same cities would be destroyed at the end of his reign.
Okay, so Pharaoh seems to know, he seems to be not completely unaware or ignorant of what dreams meant. So that's interesting. The rabbis seem to indicate that Pharaoh is not like a bumbling fool, a royal, idiot who doesn't know what's going on. It's just these dreams don't seem like, again, the way the rabbis tell the story, they seem to be deeper than what would be the obvious answers, especially, again, as they say, the ears of corn, because that's an abstract image. Corn eating other grain, eating other grain doesn't seem to happen. Something with a mouth eating something else, even another cow, well, I can see that happening, but this is a very abstract image. All right, let's see. And then again, here he is, Mr. Pharaoh.
Sagacious as he was, Pharaoh knew that none of these explanations hit the nail on the head. He issued a decree summoning all interpreters of dreams to appear before him on pain of death, and he held out great rewards and distinctions to the one who should succeed in finding the true meaning of his dreams. In obedience to his summons, all the wise men appeared, the magicians and the sacred scribes that were in Mitzrayim, the city of Egypt, as well as those from Goshen, Ramses, Zoan, and the whole country of Egypt. And with them came the princes, officers, and servants of the king from all the cities of the land.
Yeah, so this is a dream interpretation. This is a festival of dream interpretation. All the people, and again, it doesn't seem that this Midrash doesn't really reflect this kind of knowledge of Egypt. Goshen, Ramses, and Zoan are all places that are mentioned in the Bible, but they're all part of Mitzrayim. They're not separate to Mitzrayim. They seem to, again, be implying here that Mitzrayim is only the area around the Nile Delta. Anyways, let's see what happens for this dream interpretation festival.
To all these, the king narrated his dreams, but none could interpret them to his satisfaction. Some said that the 7 fat kine were the 7 legitimate kings that would rule over Egypt, and the 7 lean kine betokened 7 princes that would rise up against these 7 kings and exterminate them. The 7 good ears of corn were the 7 superior princes of Egypt that would engage in a war for their overlord, and would be defeated by as many insignificant princes, who were betokened by the 7 blasted ears. Another interpretation was that the 7 fat kine were the 7 fortified cities of Egypt, and that some future time to fall into the hands of 7 Canaanitish nations, who were foreshadowed in the 7 lean kine. According to this interpretation, the second dream supplemented the first. It meant that the descendants of Pharaoh would regain sovereign authority over Egypt at a subsequent period and would subdue the 7 Canaanitish nations as well. Roll it up,
Yep.
please.
So it seems as though, again, people are trying to interpret these dreams along the lines of like the political situation, which is interesting because this does reflect what was historically accurate, which was that the Egyptians controlled Canaan, and that Canaan would sometimes rebel against the Egyptians, and sometimes it would be under Egyptian authority. Definitely during the time of Joseph and his family, it seems as though the Canaanites are vassals of Egypt. And Pharaoh just goes, they just go into the land to bury Jacob later on, and it just seems there's this feeling like of authority that the Egyptians are in charge. I mean, we know the Egyptians were more powerful than the Canaanites, but it seems to be like they're subservient to them to some extent. That like Pharaoh Joseph doesn't need permission to go bury his dad in Egypt. I mean, in Canaan, he just goes there. It's part of they're part of their territory. So we know obviously that these interpretations of the politics are not accurate. But let's keep going.
There was a third interpretation given by some. The 7 fat kine were 7 women whom Pharaoh would take to wife, but they would die during his lifetime, their loss being indicated by the 7 lean kine. Furthermore, Pharaoh would have 14 sons, and the 7 strong ones would be conquered by the 7 weaklings, as the blasted ears of corn in his dream had swallowed up the rank ears of corn. And a fourth, you will have 7 sons, O Pharaoh. These are the 7 fat kine. These sons of thine will be killed by the 7 powerful rebellious princes. Then 7 minor princes will come, and they will kill the 7 rebels, avenge your descendants, and restore the dominion to your family.
Yep, and these are all, again, political. Some of them are more foreign policy, some are more internal. As we know, none of these are all like what you would normally think the Pharaoh would dream about. This is again kind of illustrating, the Midrash illustrates these are the interpretations that Pharaoh would normally think was happening. That the interpretation, that the dreams are about foreign policy, they're about internal problems, about his own household. We know the dreams are actually a global issue. It's not about his own household. It's not about the Egyptian sovereignty. This is really about a global pandemic, disaster, a drought, a huge thing that's going to affect everybody. It's going to affect him, but it's going to affect lots of people. And it will have an impact on foreign policy. It will have an impact on economy. But the reality is you're thinking too small, Pharaoh. If you think that this is a normal kind of dream that's only about your kingdom, you don't understand. This is a really big dream. And that, I mean, this is the setup for why what Joseph does is so amazing, and it's why it's like he blows up everybody's mind by saying, oh no, you don't understand. This is not your typical dream. Okay.
The king was as little pleased with these interpretations as with the others, which he had heard before. And in his wrath, he ordered the wise men, the magicians, and the scribes of Egypt to be killed. And the hangman made ready to execute the royal decree. However, Mirod, Pharaoh's chief butler, took fright, seeing that the king was so vexed at his failure to secure an interpretation of his dreams that he was on the point of giving up the ghost. He was alarmed about the king's death, for it was doubtful whether the successor to the throne would retain him in office. He resolved to do all in his power to keep Pharaoh alive. Therefore, he stepped before him and spoke, saying, I do remember 2 faults of mine this day. I showed myself ungrateful to Joseph, in that I did not bring his request before you, and also I saw you in distress by reason of your dream without letting you know that Joseph can interpret dreams. When it pleased the Lord God to make Pharaoh wroth with his servants, the king put me in ward in the house of the captain of the guard, me and the chief baker. And with us there was a simple young man, one of the despised race of the Hebrews, slave to the captain of the guard, And he interpreted our dreams to us, and it came to pass, as he interpreted to us, so it was. Therefore, O king, stay the hand of the hangmen, let them not execute the Egyptians. The slave I speak of is still in the dungeon, and if the king will consent to summon him hither, he will surely interpret your dreams.
Wow. All right. Well, first of all, we have Joseph's this finally allowed, and here we have a midrash that this guy has a name, Mirod, that this is finally now the opening that he needed to have. That this is, this is the opportunity. This is the window of opportunity. The guy now steps forth and says, I made a mistake, which is heroic, somewhat heroic that he actually admitted that he did it. Of course, the despised race of the Hebrews, slave to the captain, this is like, really giving us this idea that he's that he's really a low, really low life kind of kid, but nothing about the fact that this is the guy that got thrown in prison for no reason, that this is Potiphar's ex-slave, you might remember. Yeah. So
How are you?
yeah. So this is
I did. No, I didn't get the call. My mistake. But yes.
Hold on a second. So this is the this is the opportunity that Joseph finally takes, and he does tell him, and he starts off by saying, he sets it up by saying, yeah, you remember when you threw me in there. So this is this is the kind of the consequence of what happens here. What does he do? He steps in and he helps out his king. It's a, this really does give it gives us, again, this feeling like this is the right time, the right place. This is what had to happen here. Of course, he's giving his king hope, that there is going to be an answer. This is what's at stake here. Look, we have this midrash that the Pharaoh got so upset with the bad interpretations that he was getting, the ones that he knew didn't feel right, that he was killing the people as they were giving the wrong answer. So there really is a consequence here for giving the wrong answer. That's one thing, but it really does, again, now set up Joseph for coming and what he does is so powerful and so heroic that he steps up and to some extent they've now, by putting this, they're killing the people who are giving the wrong answer. They're now putting Joseph into a situation where he's to some extent going to risk his life by stepping in. This is a do or die situation. This isn't just, hey, he gave the wrong answer. He gave the wrong answer and now he's dead. So this is kind of the, this makes the setup for this even more powerful, even more dramatic, obviously. But, it kind of also gives us this background, this backup to the story. I think it's very fitting that we read this today on Reverend Lynn's birthday. We wish you a happy birthday. We wish we could give you at least a cupcake in person, but this is a great day because it is birthday of a very special person, Reverend Lynn, and I'm looking to see who else shares a birthday with Reverend Lynn, who's somebody that we can. Well, I'll tell you.
Tomorrow is Mary Magdalene, who Christian Midrash has as a prostitute. So I thought that was nice. I always like that.
That's a good one. I'm trying to think. Oh, Judy Chicago, the painter. Who's
okay.
Jewish painter, interesting counterculture, feminist. done some cool art. She was born on this day. But today, it's very appropriate that as we read about Egypt and the Pharaoh, that on this day in 1970, the Aswan High Dam went into operation, harnessing the power of the Nile River. How about that? That's a weird,
How about
that's a
that?
weird, that's a weird coincidence. And I'm trying to think who else is the
I'm happy with Judy Chicago.
Judy Chicago is pretty good. Though I'll tell you, you know who else was Natalie Wood was born
Oh,
the year before on this day too. Beautiful Natalie Wood. And you know who else was born on this day? I just saw him on TV last night. I finally started watching the Michael Jordan documentary. It's on Netflix now, called The Last Dance. It's a great documentary, but very well done documentary. Even if you don't like basketball or sports, it's a really well done documentary. And one of the guys who's in there was a character. I remember Chuck Daly was born on your birthday. He was the coach of the Pistons back in the day, and he had this slick back hair and was kind of a great, you know, he was from Pennsylvania. He was a kind of a tough Catholic high school basketball coach who made it in the NBA. And Chuck Daly was born on your day. He passed away about 11 years ago, but he was I just watched him last night in the Michael Jordan thing. So by the way, it is a well-told story. I mean, I would, like I said, I'd recommend it if you're looking for a good documentary to watch right now on Netflix. That's a good one. And it was on ESPN and a lot of people saw it, but
I just watched the Alexa Pelosi one where she has famous people reading the Declaration and the Constitution.
yeah, is that good?
It's so moving. I'm taking this online humanities course through my university, and this is the reading for today. And so I watched it. It's so moving, especially now, because we don't require that for our leaders before they take office. It should be like
We
required.
don't require a test.
I don't know about a test, even just please listen to this.
It's called The Words That Built America. Is that it?
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
And then also online, part of this class, I found Barack Obama reading the Gettysburg Address, which was a beautiful thing.
I love that idea. So yeah, watch that too. We watched it wasn't a documentary, but it was a historical fiction, also a sports one, called The English Game, which is about the beginning of soccer, the origins of football. It's like a eight episode. It's one of those I was watching it with Tracy. She loved it too. And she's not a huge soccer fan, but it was really beautiful. It was one of those shows that makes England look so beautiful. I mean, it is, but you know, it's usually raining, but it's one of those things where you're like, what a beautiful, it's not, I looked at her, it's not, come on, it makes it look so beautiful. She goes, it is a beautiful country. I know, honey, but it's not always beautiful. It's usually raining, but it makes you, it's really, really pretty. It takes place in the northern part of England. And it's about how the game of soccer moved from being a rich college man's sport to the working man's sport. So it's really cool. It was definitely entertaining. It's called The English Game. So yeah. Anybody else have any? But I will definitely watch The Word. I lost it. I found it, and then I lost it again. The Words That Built America.
Yeah, they have
I'm looking forward to that.
the Bill of Rights is read by 10 different children.
Wow.
It's really just very moving.
Oh, boy.
You know,
That's wonderful.
I hadn't read that since probably high school, all the way through.
Right.
The Constitution. It had probably been high school, maybe college, since I had read it all the way through. It was really beautiful.
Yeah.
What's it on? Netflix, Amazon?
HBO.
Oh, it's HBO.
HBO.
Yeah, it
It's a
is. It's HBO.
Damn, we just got rid of HBO.
I know, and it's funny you say that too, because I have not I've been watching I almost only watch Netflix now. So I'll have to look that up.
You were talking about soccer in the beginnings, and I was watching my cousin's interview for the Shoah Foundation.
Yeah.
And Mickey, in the early 1920s, they asked him, what did he do as a child? He played soccer.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what people
In
did.
cards.
That's what people did in Europe.
Yeah, yeah.
By the way, that's another interesting story. How the English game ended up becoming a game for, that they ended
Because
up,
he lived up in the mountains in Hungary.
and they couldn't eventually. Yeah, people all around the world are playing it.
It's all colonialism.
Yeah, but it's funny because at the end of the movie they're talking about exactly that, about how the game, how if we really want the game to take off, we want other people to get good at this game. And it was basically like, the Etonians are stopping everybody else from, like, they create rules so that nobody can be a professional, nobody, so it's about that. But they're saying, like, don't we want other people and, the rest of the world to play the game? And they start lifting off countries, Australia, Canada, America. And I go, nah, it doesn't take off here. It doesn't quite. Now, of course it does, but
Not to the same degree.
it was funny that everywhere else plays soccer, and we still don't quite get it. But yeah, it's a really pretty historical thing. And it's one of those things where you want to look up the characters and find out, like,
What's it called again?
It's called the English game. The English game.
The English game.
Yeah, and it's got other stuff there too. It's got, there's a love story, and there's the stuff about, society at the time, moving from, in the Industrial Revolution, what kind of life, how hard it was for people, and, babies getting stolen from their, kind of the Dickensian, kind of existence that these people were in. Yeah, it's got some good stuff, but it's one of those things. It's like, all they doing in England right now is filming, they're filming Downton Abbey and The Crown and all these. It's like there's this one set in England that they're filming everything. They're not. They're all doing the same thing. But if you want to watch something funny out of England, I definitely, it's still on Netflix, is Extras, Ricky Gervais thing that he did, which was a couple seasons of how it's about television. It's about him trying to break. It's kind of semi-autobiographical about working on television, but and then he did an amazing. His last series, 2 seasons, is Afterlife, which is really
Just
powerful.
incredible. Really powerful.
It's about a man whose wife dies, and the depression that he goes through. And it's funny, it's sad, it's very, very powerful. And again, because Ricky is such a atheist, it's kind of funny because he's not going to get religious, but he is. It's very, to me, whatever you want to call it, spiritual, if you want to call it, reflective of the realities of life and what it means. It's a very deep show, and it's funny, but it's also, you'll cry, you'll laugh.
Afterlife.
You'll laugh, you'll cry in the same episode.
Ricky Gervais is not one of my favorites. This was incredible.
Yeah, well,
I was really sorry it was over.
I love they did a second season, you saw.
Yeah, but not a third.
Just give the guy a chance. I don't think he thought anyone would want to see it. He talks about it.
I got nothing to do.
He said, I thought it was too depressing for anybody to, because he says, he has a longtime partner, and he thought writing about something so sad would not attract people. But I actually love almost everything the guy's ever done, almost everything.
Really great.
Yeah, but he is so anti-religion. Watching him do his debates, by the way, with Stephen Colbert is a real joy for people who do like religion, or like at least the discussion of religion. Try to see some of the archived discussions that he has about religion with Stephen Colbert. They're really fun. They're very fun when they go at it with each other, because Colbert is religious and but is also obviously very open-minded and tries to have an honest discussion about this in a funny way. So, but I also, as I said, definitely recommend some of the other stuff that he does, which kind of pokes fun at the way we as human beings treat each other. So including again himself, he always put, and remember he created The Office, which in my mind is one of the greatest shows
Oh,
ever.
yeah.
Go back and watch The English Office if you've never seen it too. You will understand why it was so brilliant and a very British thing to say.
Well, I'm going to have to go now because I have a lot of TV to watch.
A lot of TV. Everybody, please stay healthy and please. I hope I love seeing you all every week because it means that you're healthy and you're still everybody's doing good. So please stay that way.
Take care, everyone. Be
Take care.
safe.
All right. Bye-bye.